The only person who attended my husband's funeral was me. I stood alone, a solitary figure in a sea of empty, polished pews, my gaze fixed on Richard's closed casket. Our children, Alex and his wife, and our daughter Anna, had chosen the allure of cruises and the urgency of business trips over the final, quiet duty of saying goodbye to the man who had raised them. The funeral home, with its cloying scent of wilting lilies and lemon polish, felt cavernous and cold, the silence amplifying the vastness of my solitude. The funeral director, a young man named Mr. Henderson with a face full of practiced sympathy that couldn't quite mask his profound discomfort, kept glancing from me to the vacant rows, his unease a palpable thing in the still air. It was a gray, indecisive Monday, a day perfectly typical for October, when the sky hangs low and heavy, unable to commit to rain but threatening it with every gust of wind. Richard had always despised indecision. He was a man of action, of clear choices and unwavering principles. He would have hated this dreary, wavering sky. He would have hated the emptiness of this room even more. "Mrs. Helen," Mr. Henderson whispered, his voice a discreet murmur that barely disturbed the silence. He checked his watch, a nervous, jerky movement. Would you like to wait a few more minutes? Perhaps someone is running late." I drew a slow, steadying breath, the scent of stale air and flowers filling my lungs. "No, Mr. Henderson, you can begin," I replied. My voice, when it came, was a stranger to me, firmer, clearer than I'd felt in weeks, a shard of Richard's own decisiveness rising within me. Richard had also hated delays. The pastor, a man whose kind face I'd never seen before, a man who had never shaken my husband's hand or heard his hearty laugh, stepped up to the lectern. He began to recite generic, comforting words about a good man, a cherished life, and precious memories. His voice was smooth and well-practiced, but the words were hollow, prefabricated sentiments for a man he didn't know. I tuned him out, fixing my eyes instead on the ostentatious arrangement of white lilies resting on the mahogany lid of the casket. They were beautiful, I supposed, but they weren't Richard. Richard would have preferred something simpler, something honest. He would have wanted the deep red roses from our garden, the ones he'd pruned with a gardener's devotion every summer for 43 years. His hands, calloused and strong, moving with a gentle precision among the thorns. I sat in the front row, a lone island in an ocean of emptiness. The 5 vacant chairs beside me, one for Alex, one for his wife, one for Anna, one for her husband, and one for our grandson, Daniel, seemed to shout their absence, their silent condemnation, louder than any eulogy the pastor could ever deliver. None of them were here, not a single one. Alex had sent a text message the night before, a sterile blue bubble on my phone screen that felt more like an insult than an apology. "Sorry, Mom. Important meeting in Chicago. Can't reschedule. I'll call you next week." No further explanation, no emotion, no hint of an attempt to move mountains, or even a minor hill, to be there for his own father. I pictured him in some sleek, glass-walled conference room, his expensive suit perfectly tailored, checking his Rolex, his mind on profit margins and market shares, perhaps allowing a fleeting, vague thought for the somber event happening hundreds of miles away. A minor inconvenience in his otherwise productive day, Anna was worse. So much worse. She hadn't even bothered with the impersonal intimacy of a text. Her secretary, a crisp, efficient voice on the phone, had called to inform me that Ms. Ramirez was indisposed and could not travel. Indisposed. The word hung in the air, a flimsy, insulting excuse. As if we were discussing her inability to attend a Sunday brunch or a charity luncheon, not the final, irrevocable farewell to the man who had patiently taught her to ride a bike, who had carried her on his shoulders through countless summer fairs, her delighted shrieks echoing in his ears. When the mercifully brief service concluded, I followed the casket out into the biting October wind. It sliced at my face, cold and sharp, but I didn't cry. It wasn't that I wasn't mourning. The grief was a physical weight inside my chest, a constant, dull ache. But I had already shed so many tears in the preceding weeks, during the long, hushed nights by Richard's bedside, that the well seemed to have run dry. There was nothing left but a vast, arid emptiness. At the cemetery, under the perpetually weeping willows, I watched as the casket was lowered into the dark, waiting earth. An employee handed me a small shovel of dirt. I took a handful, the soil cold and gritty against my skin, and let it fall. It struck the wooden lid with a hollow, definitive thud, a sound that echoed the lonely cadence of my footsteps as I would soon walk through our now empty house. It was the sound of finality, the sound of alone. I returned to that house, the same one where we'd raised our children, where Richard and I had woven the tapestry of our life together for nearly 5 decades. Every corner held a ghost. His worn leather slippers were still positioned by his armchair, patiently waiting for his feet. The television remote was on the side table, angled exactly as he had left it, ready for his evening news ritual. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was a deafening, suffocating presence that pressed in on me from all sides. I walked to the liquor cabinet and poured myself a generous glass of the good Bordeaux we had been saving for a special occasion. This was the opposite of a special occasion, a brutal, lonely anti-celebration, but it felt strangely appropriate. I needed its warmth, its fire. Carrying the glass, I sat in my own chair, facing his empty one. Driven by a morbid, self-punishing impulse I couldn't contain, I picked up my phone and opened Instagram. Anna's profile was the first thing in my feed. She had posted just 3 hours earlier, precisely during the time her father's funeral service had been taking place. The photo was a masterpiece of curated joy. She was on a yacht, the sun glinting off a turquoise sea behind her. She was holding a champagne flute high, a radiant, carefree smile stretched across her face, surrounded by equally happy-looking friends. The caption, a string of cheerful hashtags and a breezy statement, read, "Living my best life. Yacht life, unblessed, good vibes only." I swallowed hard, the wine suddenly turning to acid in my throat. My daughter was not indisposed. She was celebrating. She was toasting to her best life, while I was burying her father alone. A wave of nausea, cold and bitter, washed over me. I kept scrolling, my thumb moving with a will of its own. Alex had also posted. A selfie taken from a low angle in what was clearly a conference room, a skyline of anonymous buildings visible through the window behind him. His caption was a boast, closing big deals. Some networking is just too important to miss. Yas hustle, yas success, making moves. No mention of his father, not a single word of loss or mourning. It was just another ordinary, successful day in the life of Alex Ramirez. I powered off the phone, the screen going black, and took a long, deep sip of the wine. It did little to quell the icy rage that was beginning to thaw the frozen numbness of my grief. On the wall opposite me hung a photograph from our 40th wedding anniversary. Richard and I were standing in front of the rose bushes he'd planted the year we moved in, his arm wrapped securely around my waist. We were both smiling, genuine, unforced smiles that reached our eyes. The roses were in full, glorious bloom in that photo, a riot of deep, velvety red. Now, in the autumn garden outside, they were withered and bare, their skeletal branches reaching towards the gray sky. Just like him. "Tomorrow," I said aloud, my voice cutting through the oppressive silence of the room. "Tomorrow I'm calling Mr. Martinez." Mr. Martinez had been our lawyer and our friend for over 3 decades. He had drafted our will just 2 years prior, a time that now felt like a different century, a different life. Back then, everything had seemed so simple, so fair. Half of everything for Alex, half for Anna, with a small, protected portion set aside for Daniel, our only grandson. The house was to be theirs, to sell or to share as they saw fit. The cabin in the mountains, Richard's favorite place on earth, was for them to enjoy as a family, to create new memories. The document was a testament to our love and our naive belief that our children felt the same. That night, I sat alone in the vast emptiness of our kitchen. This was the same kitchen where Richard, without fail, made pancakes every Sunday morning. He always made a full batch, far too much for just the 2 of us, even years after the kids had moved out. "You never know," he would say, his eyes twinkling with a stubborn, unquenchable hope. They might just show up for breakfast. They rarely did. They only ever showed up, it seemed, when they needed something. A loan, a co-signature, a free babysitter for a weekend getaway. I opened the heavy oak drawer of Richard's desk, the place where we kept all our important documents. My fingers, thin and cool, traced over the neatly labeled envelopes. Bills, deeds, insurance policies, a lifetime of responsibilities meticulously organized by his hand. Finally, I found it. A thick brown folder with the words "Last Will and Testament" typed neatly on the label. Inside, the document that Richard and I had signed with such optimism 2 years ago now felt like a relic from a lost civilization. It was a monument to a time when we still believed our children cherished us, a time when familial duty and genuine love still seemed to be intertwined. I closed the folder and walked through the silent house to our bedroom. Richard's pill bottles were still arranged in a neat row on his nightstand, a testament to the battle he had fought and lost. The doctor had said it would be quick, a matter of weeks, but it wasn't. It was 6 long, agonizing months of slow decline, of endless hospital visits that smelled of antiseptic and fear, of fleeting moments of hope brutally extinguished by despair. 6 months in which Alex visited twice, each time staying for less than an hour, his eyes constantly darting to his phone. 6 months in which Anna visited only once, a flying visit between a business trip and a vacation, armed with a litany of excuses about work, her own son's commitments, the sheer impossibility of her schedule. When Richard finally passed away, it was on an ordinary Tuesday morning. The sun was streaming through the window, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. I was holding his hand, its familiar warmth slowly fading. He opened his eyes one last time, a flicker of the old light returning to them. He smiled, a faint, tired curve of his lips. "You were always the best part of me, Helen," he whispered, his voice a mere rustle of breath. And then he was gone. I had called the children immediately, my voice shaking. Alex had promised to be there by the weekend. Anna swore she would take the first available flight. Neither of them had kept their promise. The next morning, my resolve hardened into steel. I called Mr. Martinez's office. His secretary, Linda, a woman I'd known for years, answered the phone. Upon hearing my voice, her professional tone immediately softened into one of genuine warmth and sorrow. "Oh, Mrs. Helen, my deepest condolences. We just heard about Mr. Richard. He was such a wonderful man." "Thank you, Linda," I said, my voice steady. "I need to schedule an appointment with Mr. Martinez. It's urgent." "Of course." "He has an opening tomorrow at 10 in the morning. Does that work for you?" "Perfect," I said. "That's perfect." I slept poorly that night, but it wasn't the restless, grief-stricken sleep I had grown accustomed to. This was different. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of purpose, a cold, clear clarity. It was as if Richard were there in the room with me, not as a mournful ghost, but as a supportive presence, nodding in silent, resolute approval of the path I was about to take. Mr. Martinez's office smelled exactly as it always had, a comforting blend of old books, worn leather, and freshly brewed coffee. He was a kind man, with a gentle face etched with the wisdom of decades spent navigating the complexities of human life and loss. He stood up as I entered, his expression one of sincere condolence. "Helen, it's good to see you, under the circumstances. I am so sorry about Richard. He was an extraordinary man." "Thank you, Mr. Martinez. He truly was," I said, taking the plush leather chair opposite his mahogany desk. I got straight to the point. "I need to modify our will." He nodded slowly, without a hint of surprise. This was a common ritual, I imagined. Many widows and widowers had likely sat in this very chair, seeking to rearrange the legal architecture of their lives in the wake of loss. "I understand completely. Are there any specific revisions you'd like to make?" I looked him directly in the eye, my voice devoid of any tremor. "I want to remove Alex and Anna completely." This did surprise him. He stopped nodding, his pen hovering over his legal pad. He slowly took off his reading glasses, polishing them with a handkerchief as if to buy himself a moment to process my words. "Completely?" he repeated, his brow furrowed. "Completely," I affirmed. "I want everything, the house, the cabin, the bank accounts, the investments, all of it, to go to Daniel, your grandson." "Yes," Mr. Martinez cleared his throat, a low rumble in the quiet office. "Helen, I know this is an exceptionally difficult time. Decisions made in the throes of grief can sometimes be precipitous." "I buried my husband alone, Mr. Martinez," I interrupted, my voice still calm, but now laced with an edge of cold steel. Neither of our children attended the funeral. Anna was on a yacht celebrating with friends. Alex was closing a business deal that he deemed more important than his own father. Meanwhile, Daniel, their son, called me every single day during Richard's illness. He was the one who came over to mow our lawn when Richard became too weak. He was the one who drove me to the hospital on nights when my hands were shaking too much to hold the steering wheel. He is only 22 years old, but he has more character, more integrity than both of his parents combined. Mr. Martinez was silent for a long moment, his gaze steady and thoughtful. He put his glasses back on. "I understand," he said finally, his tone shifting from cautious advisor to resolute executor. "We will prepare the new documents. I must inform you, however, that your children can, and very likely will, contest this decision after your passing." "They can try," I said, a flicker of defiance in my heart. "But I want it structured as securely as possible. I want a trust established for Daniel, one that cannot be touched or influenced by his parents." "That can certainly be arranged," he said, making detailed notes on his pad. "Do you want to set any conditions for Daniel's access to the funds?" "Only that he cannot access the principal sum until he turns 30, with exceptions for educational or medical emergencies. He is a sensible young man, but he is still young." Mr. Martinez nodded in agreement. "I will have everything drafted for your signature by the end of the week." Leaving his office, I felt a profound weight lift from my shoulders, a burden I hadn't even fully realized I was carrying. This wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of justice. It was honoring Richard's memory in the only way I had left, by ensuring that the legacy he built with his own 2 hands went to someone who truly understood and valued its worth. I walked slowly to my car, watching the everyday life of the town unfold around me. A young mother passed by, holding her little girl's hand, both of them laughing at some private shared joke. I felt no envy, only a quiet, sad understanding that the bonds of family are far more fragile and complicated than they appear in carefully curated Christmas photos. That night, for the first time since Richard had passed, I didn't wear his old soft-worn sweater to bed. I lay down in our bed, now my bed, and let the silence envelop me. It was no longer a painful, aching silence. It was a peaceful one, a silence of resolution. Richard used to have a saying, "True love doesn't need recognition, but it deserves respect." Our children had forgotten that crucial lesson, but I had not. The new papers were signed on a cloudy Thursday afternoon. Mr. Martinez watched me with a somber, professional gaze as my pen moved across the dotted lines with a quiet, unwavering determination. I didn't hesitate for a single moment. When you have buried your husband alone while your children post champagne-fueled selfies, the intimidating language of legal documents loses its power. "It's done," Mr. Martinez said, gathering the freshly signed papers and placing them into a new folder. "The process will be discreet. But I must warn you again, Helen. At some point, Alex and Anna will find out." "I know," I replied, placing my pen back into my purse, the click of its cap sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet room. "And when they do, I want them to find out from me." As I left the lawyer's office for the second time, I felt a strange sense of release. It wasn't the heat of joy or the cold satisfaction of revenge. It was simply the removal of a heavy weight. The weight of pretending, of maintaining an illusion for the sake of peace. The illusion that my children were still the caring, thoughtful people Richard and I had dreamed they would become. Back at home, I opened a closet in the study that I hadn't touched in months. Inside were meticulously organized boxes labeled by year. Each one contained a history, canceled checks, bank statements, receipts. It was a detailed accounting not just of our finances, but of the one-sided generosity that had defined my relationship with my children for decades. I pulled out a folder marked Alex Business and Education. Inside was a collection of expenses that added up to more than many people earn in a lifetime. The tuition for his MBA at a prestigious foreign university, the $70,000 for the initial investment in his first tech startup, a venture that failed spectacularly in less than a year. The staggering $120,000 for the down payment on the sprawling mansion he needed to impress his clients. The imported luxury car required to maintain his image. With every single request, Richard would frown, his brow furrowed with concern, but he would always in the end give in. "He's our son, Helen," he would say with a sigh. "One day he'll learn the value of $1. That day, it seemed, had never arrived. Anna's folder was just as revealing, a chronicle of a life lived on credit from the bank of Mom and Dad. The extravagant wedding that cost as much as a small apartment, the complete renovation of the penthouse apartment she felt she deserved after a promotion, the all-inclusive vacations to the Maldives to recover from stress, the exorbitant fees for our grandson's private school, which was, according to her, absolutely essential for his future. Each request had been accompanied by implicit promises of more visits, more phone calls, more connection, promises that dissolved into thin air the moment the money was transferred. What struck me now, looking at those cold, hard numbers, wasn't the amount itself, but the undeniable pattern. There was never any genuine gratitude, only a constant, entitled expectation that we would always be there, an endless resource to fund their ever-escalating lifestyles. It was as if our money, the fruit of decades of Richard's hard work and my careful savings, was somehow part of their early inheritance, something they were owed. I closed the folders and placed them back in the closet. They were evidence, not for a court of law, but for my own heart, a confirmation that my decision was not made in haste, but was the culmination of a lifetime of observation. The phone rang at precisely 7:32 p.m. that night. Daniel's name flashed on the screen. "Grandma, can I stop by tomorrow? I was at the used bookstore and found some old history books I think Grandpa would have liked and, well, I just wanted to show them to you." A lump formed in my throat, a familiar mix of love and sorrow. "Of course, sweetheart. Come for lunch. I'll make lasagna." The next day, I made Richard's favorite lasagna, the rich, savory aroma filling the silent house with the ghost of happier times. Daniel arrived promptly at noon, carrying a canvas bag filled with used books and wearing the same gentle, unassuming smile as his grandfather. We ate lunch on the patio, talking about simple, ordinary things. He told me about his college classes, his part-time job at the bookstore, his quiet plans to one day get a master's degree in literature. He spoke with a gentle enthusiasm, a stark contrast to the frantic, restless ambition that always characterized his parents. "You know, Grandma," he said, helping himself to more salad, "I sometimes think about the way Grandpa approached life. He always said that success wasn't about having a lot, but about needing little." I smiled, a genuine warmth spreading through me. Those were Richard's exact words. "Your grandfather would be so proud of you, Daniel." "Do you really think so?" There was a vulnerability in his voice that reminded me of him as a little boy, always seeking approval, never demanding it. "I'm absolutely sure of it," I said. After lunch, he insisted on washing the dishes. While he carefully dried the plates, he told me he was thinking about applying for a special research program in Mexican literature, but he was worried about the cost. "How much does it cost?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. He mentioned a sum that was less than a tenth of what his father had recently asked for to bail out another can't-miss investment. "Apply for it," I said simply. "But Grandma, it's expensive, and I know with everything—" "Daniel," I interrupted gently, taking the dish towel from his hands, "what do you think your grandfather and I saved for all our lives?" He fell silent, his eyes wide with confusion. "For moments exactly like this," I continued, "to help people who truly value the opportunity." When he left, carrying the leftover lasagna I had insisted he take, I stood at the door and watched his old sputtering car drive away. The chasm between him and his parents had never seemed wider or deeper. Anna called the very next day. It was the first time I had heard her voice since the perfunctory call from her secretary about the funeral she couldn't attend. "Mom." Her voice was clipped, irritated. "Daniel told me you're going to pay for his research scholarship." Not a hello, not a "how are you holding up?" Straight to the money. Always. Good morning to you too, Anna, I replied, my voice cool. Sorry, she said, not sounding sorry at all. I'm worried about you. You just lost Dad. You shouldn't be making important financial decisions right now. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. Actually, Anna, I've made several important financial decisions recently. What? What kind of decisions? The concern in her voice was transparently false, a thin veil for her fear of the potential impact on her inheritance. Why don't you come visit me? We can talk about it in person. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I'm just so busy with work, Mom. You know how it is. Yes, I said, my voice dangerously calm. I know exactly how it is. It's the same reason you couldn't come to your father's funeral. You were on a yacht, drinking champagne. A stunned silence. How did you know that? Instagram, Anna. You posted photographs for the entire world to see. Photographs taken during your father's burial. Another silence, this one longer, heavier, followed by a rushed, flustered explanation. Mom, it was complicated. A client trip. I was going through a lot emotionally and— Save me the details, I interrupted, my patience finally exhausted. Come see me if you want to talk. Otherwise, I'll assume you're very busy as always. I hung up the phone before she could formulate another excuse. My hands were shaking, not from anger anymore, but from a profound sense of relief. Decades of swallowing my words, of looking the other way, of excusing the inexcusable, were finally, blessedly, over. Alex showed up the next day. Unannounced, of course, as he always did when he wanted something. His gleaming imported car, a monument to his perceived success, was parked in the driveway with an ostentation that always made me vaguely uncomfortable. Mom! He gave me a brief, awkward hug, his arms stiff. Are you okay? You look tired. I'm fine, Alex. What brings you here? He looked around the familiar living room as if he were evaluating it for a real estate listing. Anna told me about your conversation. We're worried about you. Are you really? Yes, he said, settling into the sofa, the same one where Richard used to sit. Losing Dad was hard on all of us. I imagine so, I replied, sitting across from him. Although some of us seem to have handled it better than others. He had the decency to look momentarily ashamed. Look, Mom, about the funeral. I really couldn't cancel that meeting. It was crucial for the business. I know. The same business your father and I gave you $70,000 to start. He blinked, clearly surprised by the direct mention of money. I never talked about money like that. That was years ago. Yes, it was. Just like the $120,000 for the down payment on your house. And the $45,000 to pay off your debts when your first marriage ended. Why are we talking about this now? He interrupted, his voice sharp, his face flushing. Because your father is dead, Alex, and I am taking inventory. Not just of our assets, but of our choices. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat. What, exactly, does that mean? It means I have modified our will. You and Anna have been removed. The shock on his face would have been almost comical if the situation weren't so tragic. What do you mean, removed? You can't just— I can. And I did. Everything is going to Daniel. Daniel? His voice rose an octave. My nephew? He's practically a kid. He's 22 years old. He has more integrity in his little finger than you've shown in decades. Alex shot to his feet, his face a mottled red. This is unfair. It's the grief talking. You're not thinking clearly. On the contrary, I replied calmly, my own composure surprising me. I am thinking more clearly than I have in years. Your father built everything we have with hard work and unwavering principles. Principles that you and your sister seem to have conveniently forgotten. This is about the funeral, isn't it? I already apologized for that. No, Alex. The funeral was just the final punctuation mark on a very long, very sad story. A story of taking without giving, of demanding without thanking, A story of treating your parents like an ATM, not like people who loved you unconditionally. He was silent for a moment, his anger visibly warring with his confusion. Then he tried another tactic, his voice softening into a placating tone. "Mom, let's just talk about this calmly. Maybe we can reach an agreement, something that—" "There is no agreement to be made. The decision is final." "You're going to regret this," he snarled, grabbing his keys from the coffee table. "Anna and I can contest the will. You know that." "You can try," I replied, my voice even. "But you would only be proving my point." He slammed the door on his way out, the entire house seeming to shudder from the force of it. Through the window, I watched him get into his car and immediately pick up his phone, no doubt calling Anna. I could almost hear the frantic conversation, the disbelief, the accusations, the strategic planning to make me see reason. That night, I opened another bottle of the good Bordeaux. I poured a glass and took it out to the patio. The rose bushes Richard had tended with such loving care were beginning to wither with the onset of autumn. But there were still a few stubborn, deep red blossoms clinging to the thorny branches, resisting the inevitable. A bit like me. Looking out at the darkening garden, I remembered something Richard used to say. "Love is like these roses, Helen. It needs constant care, regular pruning, and sometimes it needs to face a long, hard winter to have any chance of blooming again." Our winter had finally arrived, and I was ready to survive it. 3 days passed in a strange, heavy silence. There were no more irate calls from Alex or Anna, only a few gentle texts from Daniel asking if I needed anything from the supermarket. It was the calm before the storm, I thought, as I watered the plants on the patio, the cool morning air a balm on my skin. The storm arrived on a Thursday, materializing in the form of Anna and her husband Frank, parking their gleaming SUV in my driveway. She didn't bother to knock. She never did. She just walked in, as if the house were still partially hers by right. "Mom," she said, her voice sharp as she dropped her designer handbag on the antique entrance table with a thud. "We need to talk." Frank trailed a few steps behind her, looking as uncomfortable as he always did in our home. He never quite fit, always checking his phone during Sunday dinners, his eyes darting towards the door as if constantly searching for an escape route. "Good morning to you." "Too, Anna," I replied calmly, continuing to tend to my ferns. "Is it true what Alex told me?" I set the watering can down on the stone patio and turned to face her. My daughter, so similar to me in appearance, with the same dark hair and high cheekbones, yet so utterly different in spirit. Her eyes, the same shade of brown as mine, were now narrowed with suspicion and accusation. "That depends on what exactly," he said. "That you've disinherited us. That you're giving everything to Daniel." "This is insane, Mom." I gestured towards the patio furniture. She hesitated, then settled rigidly onto the edge of a wrought iron chair. Frank remained standing, already absorbed in his phone. "It's not insane, Anna. It's a consequence." "A consequence of what? Of not attending a funeral?" The coldness in her voice, the dismissive way she said it, struck me like a physical blow. It wasn't just about her absence. It was her complete failure to acknowledge the gravity of that absence. "Do you really believe it's only about the funeral?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. She crossed her legs, meticulously adjusting her expensive skirt. "What else could it possibly be about?" I took a deep, steadying breath. "Your father was sick for 6 months, Anna. 6 long months. In that time, you visited him once, for less than 2 hours, before you invented an emergency at the office. In those 6 months, you rarely called to ask how he was. And when he finally passed away, you chose a yacht trip over saying goodbye to him." I was processing it in my own way. She defended herself, her voice defensive. "Not everyone deals with grief the same way." "That isn't dealing with grief, Anna. That is ignoring it." She glanced at her husband, seeking support, but he was tapping out an email, oblivious. "And what about Daniel?" she continued, her voice rising. "He barely knew Dad. Why does he deserve everything and we get nothing?" The sheer, breathtaking injustice of that statement was almost comical. Daniel visited his grandfather every single week. He read to your father when his eyesight began to fail. It was Daniel who helped me organize the mountain of medications, who drove me to the emergency room in the middle of the night when I was too distraught to see the road clearly. He knew him, Anna, and more importantly, he cared. "This isn't fair," she repeated, her voice turning shrill. "We have a right to that inheritance. It's ours by law. Actually, it's not. The assets are mine now, to do with as I please. And I have decided who they will go to when I am gone." Frank finally pocketed his phone, sensing the escalating tension. "Mrs. Helen," he began, his tone unctuous and placating. "Anna is just worried about you. Decisions made during a time of grief can be—" "Save me your facade of concern, Frank," I interrupted, my patience snapping. "Neither of you has ever cared about me or Richard, except for when you needed money for a new car or favors to advance your careers." The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. Anna looked genuinely shocked, not by the accusation itself, I suspect, but by the fact that I had finally dared to say it out loud. "How can you say that?" she whispered, her eyes welling with tears of indignation, not sorrow. "We're your family. Family." My voice was low, but carried the weight of years of disappointment. "Family visits, family calls. Family shows up when times are hard, not just on holidays and birthdays when expensive gifts are involved." Anna shot to her feet, her face flushed with anger. "You're being cruel. Dad would never approve of this." "Your father," I replied, my voice as calm as a frozen lake, "sat in that armchair for 6 months, waiting for his children to find an hour in their busy schedules to come see him one last time. He died a disappointed man, Anna. So don't you dare talk to me about what he would or would not approve of." She grabbed her handbag with a jerky, furious movement. "This isn't over, Mom. Alex is already talking to a lawyer. You can't just cut us off like this." "Actually," I said, walking to the front door and holding it open for her. "I can, and I did." After they left, she didn't slam the door. I closed it gently myself, with the same quiet firmness that had become my armor since Richard's death. I returned to the patio and my plants. I finished watering the azaleas, Richard's favorites, and sat in his old rocking chair. The phone rang inside the house. I let it go to voicemail. Minutes later, it rang again, and then again. On the 4th try, I picked it up. "Hello, Helen. It's Charles." The voice of our next-door neighbor, a friend for over 30 years, was filled with concern. "Is everything all right over there? I just saw Anna and her husband leave your house, and she looked like she was practically running." Charles and his wife, Lucy, knew our family better than almost anyone. They had witnessed the children's triumphs and their slow, steady drift into selfishness. "I'm fine, Charles. Just settling some long-overdue accounts." "I understand," he said, and from the warmth in his voice, I knew he truly did. "Lucy and I were just thinking. Would you like to come over for dinner tonight?" "Nothing formal. Just some stew and some company," I hesitated. Since Richard's death, I had been avoiding social gatherings, the cheerful chatter feeling like a betrayal of my grief. But suddenly, the thought of sitting with old friends, people who had known the real Richard, the real us, seemed like a lifeline. "I would love that, Charles. Thank you." That night, in the cozy warmth of my neighbor's home, with the comforting smell of homemade stew filling the air, I told them everything. The lonely funeral, the Instagram posts, the decision to change the will, the ugly confrontations with my children. Lucy reached across the table and held my hand, her grip firm and reassuring. "You did what you had to do, Helen. Richard would have understood." "But they're my children, Lucy," I murmured, finally feeling the tears I had held back for so long begin to fall. "How did we get to this point?" Charles, ever the pragmatist, refilled my wineglass. "Sometimes people take paths we can't understand, Helen. You and Richard gave them every opportunity, all the love in the world. What they chose to do with it, that was their choice, not a reflection on you. Some people just don't know how to value what they have until it's gone," Lucy added softly. "And Daniel?" I asked, needing their reassurance. "Am I doing the right thing by him?" "That boy has his head on straighter than anyone I know," Charles said with a firm nod. "Richard always said so. If only Alex and Anna were a bit more like the kid," he used to say. I returned home that night feeling lighter. Not because my decision was any less painful, it was already firm, but from the simple act of sharing the burden of being heard and understood without judgment. The next morning, a letter arrived. I recognized Alex's slanted, impatient handwriting immediately. Not an email, not a text, but a handwritten letter. This was new. I took it out to the patio with a cup of tea, my hands trembling slightly. The envelope was heavy, formal. I opened it slowly. "Mom," it began. "After reflecting on our conversation, I realize you might be right about some things. I haven't been the son I should have been to you and Dad in recent years. Work, commitments, life. It all seemed to pile up, and without realizing it, I put you both in the background. About the funeral, there is no excuse. I should have been there. That's a failure I'll have to carry forever. As for the will, I understand your disappointment, even though the decision hurts. Daniel is a good kid and deserves recognition. Perhaps we can talk about a distribution that acknowledges your concerns, but doesn't completely cut off your own children. Please consider it. We are family, despite everything. With love, Alex." I reread the letter 3 times. It was conciliatory, almost sincere, almost. The carefully inserted mention of a distribution revealed the true motive. This wasn't about genuine regret. It was about negotiation. Still, it was a start. I left the letter on the table unanswered. A few well-crafted paragraphs on expensive stationery couldn't erase decades of neglect, and a single letter couldn't undo the haunting image of Richard, waiting by the phone for calls that never came. Daniel showed up that afternoon, unannounced, carrying a toolbox. "Grandma," he said with a smile, "I noticed the railing on the patio stairs is a little loose. I thought I'd fix it for you." I watched him work, his careful, precise movements a mirror of his grandfather's. The way he frowned in concentration, the way he measured twice before making a single cut. "Daniel," I said when he had finished, wiping his hands on a rag, "there's something I need to tell you." We sat on the newly sturdy steps, and I explained everything. The modification to the will, my decision to leave him the entirety of the estate. He was silent for a very long time, his eyes fixed on his own calloused hands. "Grandma," he said finally, his voice barely a whisper, "I don't deserve this. I didn't do anything special." "That's exactly why you deserve it," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. "You didn't do any of it expecting something in return. You were just there, because you cared. Mom and Uncle Alex are going to be furious," he murmured. "They already are." He shook his head slowly. "I don't want to be the cause of more conflict in the family." I took his hands in mine. They were working hands, strong and capable, so different from his parents' soft, manicured ones. "Daniel, your grandfather built everything we have with honesty and hard work. He valued people who did the same. You are the right person to carry on what he started." He finally met my gaze, his eyes moist. "I'll try not to disappoint you both." "I know you won't," I said, and in that moment, I had never been more certain of anything in my life. When he left, I sat on the patio until dusk, rocking slowly in the chair Richard had built for me decades ago. The sky turned from orange to purple, and the first stars began to appear. "Am I doing the right thing, Richard?" I whispered to the quiet sky. The silence that answered felt peaceful, like a silent, universal approval. The following week, I received a call from Mr. Martinez. "Helen, I'm just calling to inform you that Alex has been in contact with me." I sighed, a weary breath. "What did he want?" "He wanted to know if the new will has been officially registered. When I confirmed that it has, he inquired about the process for a potential legal challenge." "And what did you tell him?" "The truth. That it is your unequivocal right to dispose of your assets as you see fit, and that the document is legally sound and ironclad. Thank you, Mr. Martinez. He did mention he would try to speak with you again," the lawyer added. "He said he has a compromise proposal." "I imagine he does," I said, and hung up the phone. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Richard and I had shared coffee every morning for nearly 50 years, where our children had done their homework, where we had celebrated every milestone of their lives. I took a notebook and a pen from the drawer and began to write. Not another will, but a letter, an explanation, something for Alex and Anna to read after I was gone. It wasn't an accusation, but a testimony. "My dear children," I began, "if you are reading this, it means I am no longer with you. I want you to understand that the decision I made was not born of anger or revenge. I wrote for hours, pouring decades of love, disappointment, and eventual acceptance onto the page. I wrote about the dreams Richard and I had for them, and the growing sadness with which we watched the distance that time, ambition, and money had carved between us. I wrote about how, in the end, it was never the money that mattered, but the presence, the shared time, the small, unremarked kindnesses that are the true currency of a family's life. And I wrote that, despite everything, I still loved them. Because a mother's love, I explained, doesn't simply vanish, even when it is wounded. Again and again, I finished the letter, sealed it in an envelope, and wrote on the front, "To be opened after my departure." I placed it in the same drawer where Richard had kept his most important documents, nestled among the artifacts of his well-ordered life. The doorbell rang at 10 o'clock the next morning. It was Alex standing on the threshold. He wasn't wearing his usual sharp executive suit, but jeans and a simple polo shirt. He looked younger, more vulnerable. "Mom," he said, "can we talk?" I let him in. He looked around the living room as if seeing it for the first time in years. In a way, perhaps he was. "Did you change the curtains?" he asked, pointing to the new floral drapes. "Yes," I said. 2 years ago." He had the grace to look ashamed. "Can I sit?" he asked, his tone hesitant. I pointed to the sofa. He sat rigidly, like a visitor in a stranger's house, not like a man who had grown up sliding down these very banisters. "I received your letter," I began, "and I spoke with Mr. Martinez. Mom, before you say anything, I want you to know, I think I'm starting to understand. We were not the children we should have been." "No," I said simply. "You weren't." He seemed taken aback by my blunt agreement. He had expected me to soften, to demur, as I always had. "About the will," he continued, pressing forward. "I've thought of a solution that might work for everyone. A compromise. I'm listening. Anna and I agree that Daniel deserves recognition. He was there when we weren't, so we propose a new split, 50% for Daniel and 25% for each of us." I looked at my son, this man I had nursed and cradled, whom I had taught to walk and talk. This man who was now standing in my living room, negotiating percentages as if we were in a corporate boardroom. "Alex," I said, my voice soft but firm, "this is not a negotiation. It's not a business deal. It is a decision based on who demonstrated an understanding of the true value of what your father and I built." "But we're your children," he insisted, a familiar note of frustration creeping into his voice. "That has to count for something." "It does count," I said. "It's why I spent decades helping you two financially. Paying for your degrees, for Anna's extravagant wedding, for your cars, for your trips, for your emergencies. You have already received your inheritance, Alex. Several times over." He opened his mouth to protest, then closed it again. For a fleeting moment, I saw something shift in his eyes. It wasn't anger. It was a flicker of dawning comprehension, as if he were finally beginning to grasp the true magnitude of what he had lost. "And it had nothing to do with money. I really messed up, didn't I?" he murmured, his voice barely audible. I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. He stood up slowly. I'm going to think about all this, Mom." "You do that," I said. At the door, he paused, his hand on the knob. "I miss him," he said softly. "Dad." I only realized how much I miss him when it was already too late. "I miss him too," I replied. "Every single day." After he left, I went back out to the patio. The rose bushes, which had looked so dead and barren just weeks ago, were beginning to show the first signs of recovery after their harsh pruning. Tiny, bright green buds were emerging on the gnarled old stems. Maybe, I thought, something was beginning to awaken in Alex too. Not enough to change my decision. That was set in stone. But perhaps enough for him to begin to understand what he had truly lost. And maybe, just maybe, that understanding was a more valuable legacy than any inheritance I could ever leave him. Spring arrived without fanfare, painting the garden in tentative shades of green and yellow. The rose bushes that Richard had so lovingly tended bloomed again, their deep red blossoms a stubborn, resilient testament to his care. I spent my mornings on the patio, watching the hummingbirds and butterflies, small daily miracles that Richard and I used to point out to each other with quiet delight. 6 months had passed since I had changed the will. 6 months of tense silences and hesitant reconciliations, of fumbled attempts and small, uncertain steps. Alex called weekly now. The calls were often brief, sometimes awkward, but they were about me, not about money. He asked how I was feeling, if the garden needed anything, if I had heard from Daniel. They were the conversations of a son, not a creditor. Anna was another story. After our heated confrontation, she had retreated into a wounded, resentful silence. She sent occasional, perfunctory text messages about trivial things, the weather, a movie she'd seen, but she avoided any mention of the will or her father, as if she could erase the unpleasant reality by simply pretending it didn't exist. Daniel, however, had become a constant, comforting presence. He came for lunch every Sunday, sometimes bringing books or small, thoughtful gifts, not the expensive, impersonal offerings his parents used to bestow, but things he knew I would genuinely appreciate. A rare variety of orchid for the garden, a handmade bookmark, a coffee mug with a quote from a poet Richard and I both loved. On this particular Sunday, he arrived with a thick folder tucked under his arm. "What's that?" I asked as we stood in the kitchen, preparing lunch together. He smiled that shy, gentle smile that was so much like Richard's. "It's a project. I wanted to show it to you before I start." After lunch, he spread papers across the dining room table, blueprints, sketches, detailed budgets. "Remember we talked about doing something with the house and the cabin someday?" He pointed to a set of drawings. I was thinking of turning the cabin into a small community library. This neighborhood doesn't have one, and there are so many kids. I examined the plans, the evident care and thought that had gone into every detail. "And this," he continued, showing another set of drawings, "is for the main house, eventually. Not now, of course," he added quickly, "but one day. A community center for seniors. A place where people like you can meet, learn new things, share their skills." I looked at my grandson, no longer a boy, but a man with vision and compassion. A man who didn't see property as a status symbol, but as an opportunity to build something meaningful. "Your grandfather would have absolutely loved this," I said, my voice thick with emotion. Daniel's face lit up. "Remember how he always said an empty house is a waste of possibilities?" I remembered perfectly. It was one of Richard's favorite phrases, one he repeated often after the children left home and the rooms fell silent. "Daniel, these plans are wonderful. But this is going to cost a great deal of money," he nodded. "I know. I'm saving up, and I have some friends from college who work in social architecture who are willing to help with the design pro bono. Why don't we start now?" I asked. He looked at me surprised. "Now? But Grandma, the inheritance. That's for when you—" "Daniel, I'm nearly 80 years old. I would much rather see these plans become a reality while I'm still here to enjoy them." The smile that spread across his face was worth every penny Richard and I had ever saved. The following week, I took Daniel to the bank. We opened a joint account, and I transferred enough funds to get the cabin project off the ground. Not all of it. I still had enough sense to ensure my own security, but a substantial amount, enough for him to begin turning his dream into a reality. The bank manager, a man who had known Richard and me for decades, watched our interaction with a knowing, gentle smile. "Richard would be so proud, Helen," he commented as we finalized the documents. "Yes," I agreed. "He always said that money is just a tool. What truly matters is what you build with it." When we left the bank, Daniel seemed almost overwhelmed by the weight of the responsibility. "Grandma, I promise I will do everything right. Every penny will be used exactly as it should be." I squeezed his arm gently. "I know you will, dear. That's why we're doing this." The news, predictably, reached Alex and Anna faster than we could have imagined. In a town like ours, secrets have short legs, especially when they involve large bank transfers and nascent construction projects. Alex called that very night. "Mom, I heard you and Daniel opened a joint account at the bank." For the first time in a very long time, I felt no need to explain or justify my decisions. "Yes, we did." There was a pause. "Can I ask what for?" To fund a project. Daniel is going to turn the cabin into a community library. Another pause, this one longer. I see, he said, his voice strangely restrained. That's an interesting idea. It was his idea, completely. Well, he said, surprising me completely. If you need any help with the documentation, the permits, anything legal, I'm at your disposal. After I hung up, I stared at the phone for a long time. It was not the reaction I had been bracing for. Anna showed up the next morning. She came alone without Frank and not in her ostentatious SUV, but in a small, discreet car I didn't even know she owned. Mom, she said, standing at the door. Can we talk? I let her in with a sense of trepidation. She sat at the kitchen table, the site of so many of our family's most important conversations. She looked different. Less makeup, simpler clothes, a weariness around her eyes that had nothing to do with a lack of sleep. I heard about Daniel's project, she began. The library at the cabin. I nodded, waiting for the inevitable explosion. Instead, she stunned me. I think it's a wonderful idea. You do? She nodded, her eyes fixed on the coffee cup I had placed in front of her. Dad always talked about doing something like that, remember? He had that idea of creating a reading space for the neighborhood kids. I did remember. It was one of Richard's many dreams that had never materialized, always postponed for a later that never came. Daniel remembered that, I said softly. He paid attention when your father spoke. A shadow of sadness crossed Anna's face. I should have paid more attention, too. We sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the ticking of the old wall clock. I'm getting a divorce, she said abruptly. What? She gave a sad, brittle smile. Ironic, isn't it? After everything you and Dad invested in that ridiculously extravagant wedding. I didn't know what to say. What happened? She sighed, a deep, shuddering breath. I realized we had built a life based entirely on appearances. The house was too big, the cars were too expensive, the parties were too elaborate, and there was absolutely no real substance underneath it all. She looked me straight in the eye, her own eyes glistening. Since you changed the will, Mom, I've done a lot of thinking. About what really matters. And you were right. I became exactly the type of person Dad always criticized. Someone who values things over people, who measures success in acquisitions, not in connections. She wiped away a single tear, and I missed my chance to say goodbye to him. For the first time in a very long time, I saw my daughter. I truly saw her, not the high-powered executive or the absent mother, but the little girl who used to dance in the rain with her father. It's never too late to change, Anna. She smiled melancholically. For some things it is. I can never apologize to Dad now. But maybe I can start honoring what he valued. That afternoon I took her to the cemetery. We stood before Richard's simple grave, now adorned with the fresh red roses I brought weekly. Anna knelt, placing a trembling hand on the cool granite as if trying to physically connect with her absent father. I stepped back, giving her the space and privacy she had never given Richard in his final months. From a distance, I watched as her shoulders shook with silent, belated sobs. A late farewell, perhaps, but not too late for her own redemption. On the way home, she asked about Daniel's project. Can I help? In any way? I have a lot of experience in marketing. I could help spread the word, get book donations. I'm sure Daniel would appreciate that, I replied. Why don't you talk to him? Will he even want my help? After everything? Daniel doesn't hold grudges. In that, he's just like his grandfather. The following Sunday, for the first time in years, I had both of my children and my grandson sitting around the same dining table. The meal began with a palpable tension in the air, but as we ate, something began to shift. Alex asked Daniel genuine, thoughtful questions about the library plans. Anna offered practical, useful suggestions for community outreach and fundraising. Daniel, in turn, listened and responded, even laughing at one of Alex's terrible jokes. It wasn't perfect. The wounds were too deep to be healed in a single afternoon, but it was a start. As we were having coffee on the patio, Alex cleared his throat nervously. Daniel, he said, your project with Grandma. It's an excellent idea. Something Grandpa would have loved. Daniel looked at him, surprised by the unexpected praise. Thanks, Uncle Alex. If you need any help with the legal side, Alex continued, permits, contracts, anything, I'm at your disposal. And I can help with the marketing, Anna added quickly. I can create a website, manage social media, get the word out. Daniel looked at me, his expression one of pure confusion at this sudden turn of events. I gave him a small, encouraging smile. That would be great, he said finally. I'm planning to start the remodel next month. And so, on a warm Sunday afternoon, something small and fragile began to grow between my children and my grandson. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was an acknowledgement of a shared past and the quiet possibility of a different future. When they had all gone, I sat on the patio, looking at the garden Richard and I had cultivated for decades. The rose bushes were in full, glorious bloom. I could almost hear Richard's voice on the wind, his gentle, ironic humor. Maybe it's a new beginning, Helen, I imagined him saying. Or maybe it's just convenience. Either way, as long as everyone is growing in the process, perhaps it doesn't matter. And that night, I slept better than I had in months. The cabin remodel began on a sunny Monday in April. Daniel had assembled a small, dedicated team, a few friends from his architecture program, some local volunteers, and to my astonishment, Alex and Anna. Alex showed up early, dressed in jeans and an old t-shirt, clothes I didn't even know he owned. He came bearing the approved building permits, having used his contacts to navigate weeks of bureaucracy in a matter of days. It's the least I can do, he admitted with a shrug. Anna arrived shortly after, carrying a box of coffee and pastries for the crew. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, a stark contrast to her usual elaborate styling. She also brought a laptop and a stack of organized folders. I've started the social media push, she explained, showing me the website she had already built, the Richard Ramirez Community Library. We already have pledges for over 500 book donations. I stood back, a silent observer, watching my children work side by side with my grandson. Alex held ladders, Anna organized volunteers, both of them following Daniel's directions with a humility I had never witnessed in them before. It wasn't seamless. There were moments of tension, sideways glances when a past grievance was accidentally unearthed, awkward silences when Richard's name was mentioned. But there was also something new growing between them, a hesitant respect perhaps, or at the very least, a shared understanding. At the end of that first long day, we all sat on the cabin's dusty porch, exhausted but satisfied. Alex had a smear of dirt across the cheek of his usually immaculate face. Anna had a fleck of white paint in her hair. Daniel was smiling more openly than I had seen him smile in years. Grandpa would have loved seeing this, he commented, looking at the cabin's skeleton, where old, small windows had been removed to make way for large panes of glass that would flood the space with light. Yes, he would have, Alex agreed, his voice surprisingly soft. He always talked about creating spaces where people could grow. I don't think I really understood what he meant until recently. Anna nodded silently, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the sun was beginning to set. In the weeks that followed, a new routine was established. Alex came on weekends, using his business acumen to source materials at a discount. Anna was there almost daily, coordinating donations, organizing small fundraising events, and stirring up genuine community excitement for the project. Daniel was the heart of it all, a patient, determined leader with a clear vision of what the space could become. I watched it all unfold with a complex mix of emotions, joy for the project, immense pride in the man Daniel had become, and a poignant melancholy, seeing my own children finally embodying the qualities Richard and I had always hoped to instill in them. Far too late for him to witness it. One afternoon, I found Anna alone inside the cabin, carefully sorting donated children's books onto newly built shelves. It's a good start, I commented. She nodded, running her hand over the colorful spines. You know what's strange, she said. I'm enjoying this far more than I've ever enjoyed my actual job. It's not so strange, I replied. Your father always said that doing something for others brings a kind of satisfaction that money can never buy. She smiled wistfully. He told me that many times. I just wasn't listening. She paused, then turned to me, her expression serious. Mom, about the will. I understand why you did what you did, and it's okay. Really. I looked at her, surprised. It is, she insisted. Daniel deserves it. He was there when we weren't. I want you to know that I'm not doing this because of the will. I'm not trying to get back into your good graces so you'll change your mind. I know, I said softly, and I realized with a sense of wonder that it was true. The money was no longer the central point of our fractured relationship. Perhaps it never had been. It had been a symbol of something else entirely. Recognition, presence, shared values. Alex had a revelation of his own a few weeks later. He arrived early one Saturday, unloading lumber for the new bookshelves. I sold the car, he announced casually. What car? I asked, knowing full well which one he meant. The imported one. The one you and Dad always found so excessive. I stopped what I was doing, stunned. Why? He shrugged, a gesture that failed to hide the emotion in his eyes. I realized I didn't need it. It was always more about impressing other people than any real necessity. He paused. I used part of the money to start a new scholarship fund at the university's Faculty of Arts, in Dad's name. I looked at my son, this man who for so long had seemed to have lost his way, and I saw a glimpse of the boy he used to be, the boy who once spent his entire allowance to help a classmate. Your father would be so proud, I said simply. Daniel seemed the most surprised of all by the gradual transformation of his uncle and aunt. One afternoon, as we worked together in the small garden that would surround the library, he voiced his confusion. Grandma, I don't understand. 6 months ago, they barely visited. Now they're here almost every day. What changed? I thought for a moment before answering, my hands busy pulling weeds. Sometimes people get lost, Daniel. They get so busy chasing things they think are important, money, status, success, that they forget what truly matters. Like Grandpa's death? And you changing the will? Maybe, I said. Or maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe it's just seeing you, the next generation, living by a different set of values, showing them another way. He considered this in silence. Do you think I should trust it? This change? Trust? But watch, I advised, echoing a phrase Richard often used. Time reveals the truth of people's hearts far better than any words. 2 months after the work began, the Richard Ramirez Community Library was nearly complete. The shelves were filled with books, the walls were painted in warm, welcoming colors, and reading nooks were strategically placed to catch the morning sun. The inauguration was set for a Saturday in June. Anna had organized everything with an efficiency that was both impressive and touching. On the morning of the opening, I arrived early. The morning sun streamed through the large new windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. On the main wall, a large framed photograph of Richard, taken years earlier in his garden, smiled down on the room. He held a gardening trowel in one hand and a book in the other. Below it, a simple brass plaque read, "In memory of Richard Ramirez, who believed that books and gardens are where dreams grow." Tears streamed silently down my face. He is seeing it, you know. Daniel's voice startled me. He had come in silently. He put his arm around my shoulders. Somehow he's here. I could never have done this without you, Grandma, he whispered. It wasn't me, Daniel. It was you, your vision. He smiled, that smile so reminiscent of his grandfather. I could only do this because you and Grandpa taught me what really matters, and because you had the courage to make a difficult decision when it was necessary. Alex and Anna arrived together, both looking nervous but proud. The inauguration exceeded all our hopes. Dozens of people from the community came, their faces filled with excitement and gratitude. In the midst of the happy chaos, I saw Alex talking animatedly with a group of teenagers about starting a professional mentoring program. I saw Anna organizing a sign-up sheet for a children's story hour, and I saw Daniel, moving through the space, connecting people, building a community right before my eyes. Our neighbors, Charles and Lucy, approached me. Richard would be beaming, Lucy said. Yes, he would, I agreed. You know, Charles added quietly, gesturing towards Alex and Anna, they seem different. More like they were when they were kids. It was true. There was a lightness to them, an authenticity that had been buried for decades under layers of ambition and materialism. Sometimes, I replied, we lose our way. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we find the way back home. At the end of the day, when the guests had gone, the 4 of us gathered on the small patio behind the library, where Daniel had planted a new rose garden in Richard's honor. Alex, holding a glass of sparkling water, raised it in a toast. To Richard, he said, who taught us more than we ever recognized. To Richard, we repeated in unison. That night, as the four of us sat on the patio of my home, a comfortable quiet settled over us. Alex cleared his throat. Mom, he began, we've been thinking a lot in recent months. About Dad, about our choices, about the will. I tensed. He held up a hand. It's not what you think. I wanted to say that you were right. About everything. And the decision you made was the right one. It's true, Anna added, her voice soft. Daniel deserves everything. He understands the value of what you and Dad built in a way we never did. We want you to know, Alex continued, that we respect your decision. We will never contest it. We're not doing any of this, the library, the time we're spending here, to get back in the will. We're doing it because we finally understand what Dad tried to teach us all our lives. That true value isn't in what you have, Anna finished, but in what you build, in the connections you make, in the good you do in the world. I looked at my children, these adults who had been strangers to me for so long, and I finally saw the echoes of their father in their eyes. Your father would be so proud to hear you say that, I said. Later, alone in the quiet house, I took the letter I had written to them from the drawer. I reread the words of disappointment and pain. They were true when I wrote them, but they felt like they belonged to a different time, a different family. I folded the letter and placed it back in the drawer. Maybe someday I would rewrite it. Or maybe it was no longer necessary. Some truths don't need to be written. They are lived. Richard had always known that. And at long last, his children were finally beginning to learn it too. The first anniversary of Richard's death arrived with the turning of the leaves. I had planned to go to the cemetery alone, a private pilgrimage. But as I prepared to leave, 3 cars pulled into my driveway. It was Daniel, Alex, and Anna. We thought you might like some company today, Daniel said, holding a bouquet of deep red roses. At the cemetery, we stood together before Richard's simple headstone. The air was crisp, the sky a brilliant cloudless blue. When we had paid our respects, Alex spoke. Mom, we'd like to do something special today. A celebration of Dad's life. That afternoon, my kitchen, which had been so silent for so long, was filled with the chaotic, beautiful sounds of my children trying to cook. They worked together, clumsy but determined, to recreate Richard's favorite meal. Alex wrestled with the pasta sauce. Anna fretted over a lopsided bread pudding. Daniel acted as the cheerful, patient coordinator. That evening, we sat down to a meal that was far from perfect, but was made with love and shared in good company. We told stories about Richard, and for the first time, we laughed more than we cried. After dinner, Daniel presented me with a gift. It was a large leather-bound book. On the cover, in simple gold letters, were the words, Richard Ramirez, A Life of Purpose. With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside was a memory book, a carefully compiled history of Richard's life, told through old photographs, letters, and testimonies from friends and colleagues that Alex and Anna had helped gather. The final pages contained recent photos, the library being built, Alex mentoring teenagers, Anna reading to children. The very last page held a single photograph of the 4 of us, smiling in front of the library on its opening day. Beneath it, a simple caption, The Legacy Continues.